Tonight's lead, the fight against Stand Your Ground and the legacy of Trayvon Martin. Today, vigils and protests are being held all across the country to mark a somber date. It's been exactly 2 years since the shooting death of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin. The tragedy that sparked a national outcry started as a local news story.
New tonight, a deadly shooting in Sanford. Police have the gun, they've got the shooter, but they have not arrested him. And as Fox 35's Keith Landry tells us, the dead man's grieving family wants to know why not.
Was that a friend of yours?
That was my son.
It was your son?
This afternoon, we met Tracy Martin at the crime scene. He says his 17-year-old son, Trayvon Martin, was shot to death.
He walked out the house to go to the store. He was going to the store.
The country came to know Trayvon's grieving parents, Tracy Martin and Sabrina Fulton. And within days, the death of this young man triggered massive protests across Florida and beyond. I myself was moved to action. We came for permanent justice. Arrest Zimmerman now. That's what this rally is about.
I want to say first and foremost, I thank God for being here, and I thank God for you being here. I still say we need an arrest. Thank you.
Less than a month after the shooting, President Obama addressed the tragedy.
But my main message is to the parents of Trayvon Martin. You know, if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon. And, you know, I think they are right to expect that all of us as Americans are going to take this with the seriousness it deserves, and that we're going to get to the bottom of exactly what happened.
3 weeks later, George Zimmerman was finally arrested, and his acquittal last year set off new questions about race and justice in America. In particular, the growing influence of Stand Your Ground laws. In 2005, Florida became the first state to adopt the law. Since then, 66% of people who have invoked Stand Your Ground in Florida have walked free, and more people than ever are carrying guns. Today, there are 1.1 million concealed weapons permits in Florida, triple the number from before Stand Your Ground. And it's not just Florida. 24 other states have followed suit with similar laws. Stand Your Ground is a national injustice, and that's why the fight continues 2 years after the shooting of Trayvon Martin. Joining me now is Congresswoman Corrine Brown, a Democrat from Florida and a tireless fighter to repeal Stand Your Ground, and Jonathan Capehart, who covered this story for the Washington Post. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks, Red.
Congresswoman, 2 years after the shooting of Trayvon Martin, are more Americans waking up to the injustice of this Stand Your Ground law, do you think?
Reverend, thank you for your leadership on this matter. And let's be clear, every time a jury get the instructions, Stand Your Ground is a part of that instructions. And so whether the prosecutors or the defendants talk about Stand Your Ground, when they send the jury out, that is part of the instructions. And Stand Your Ground needs to stand down. And I'm looking forward to joining you and the leadership in this country, the Congressional Black Caucus and others, in your march going to Tallahassee on the 10th.
Well, we're dealing with the Stand Your Ground law, yes, with a rally and vigil and prayer on the 10th in Tallahassee. You know, Jonathan, I remember the first rally, the first big rally when we got involved. All people were asking for, no one was making a decision on the outcome of the case, but we went down, called the first big rally, saying, why don't you arrest the man? How do you have a law that assumes that if a man says I felt threatened, he's automatically acquitted? That's all. And when we found out this law really provided that, it became a national movement.
Right, and that was the key thing behind the protests. that you were involved in, that a lot of people were involved in those days before George Zimmerman's arrest, was that they wanted an arrest. How is it possible that a 17-year-old kid could be shot dead and the person who shot him not be arrested, not be put into the criminal justice system and held accountable? And that's when we came to know the name Trayvon Martin, and that's when we came to be horrified by the Stand Your Ground law that allowed George Zimmerman to go free. And one of the more gracious moments of Tracy Martin and Sabrina Fulton was when they said over and over and over again that they weren't, all they wanted was for George Zimmerman to, one, be arrested, and then to, two, face a jury and to be held accountable, and that they would accept the jury's decision. Both those things happened. The jury decided to acquit George Zimmerman, and Tracy Martin and Sabrina Fulton have acquitted themselves with unbelievable grace. And I think that, for the American people and for people who want stand your ground laws, as the Congresswoman said, to stand down, we need more people like Tracy Martin and Sabrina Fulton to protest and to go to these state capitals where these laws are on the books and to have them changed.
Now, the Congresswoman, you've been dealing with these laws and been raising the question, and people are now advocating like Corrine Brown. In fact, I spoke last night with Tracy Martin, the father of Trayvon Martin, and he spoke about an epidemic of injustice. Listen to this.
It's an epidemic. It seems like it's an epidemic where, the value of African-American kids' lives really don't mean anything. We got to stand up as fathers. We got to stand up as leaders and let this country know, it's not okay to kill our kids. I feel as though this country actually value guns more than they do our children's lives. And that's sad.
He feels the country values guns more than our children's lives, Congresswoman.
Well, I think the law emboldens people to be aggressive, and once you're aggressive, you can say, well, I felt threatened. And the disparity, when you think about Miss Alexandra, a warning shot, and she got 20 years, and yet you can kill a young African-American, and then you just walk. And you're the victim. So it's too much disparity. The law is sloppy, and it needs to be cleaned up. It started with a castle doctrine, meaning that if you break into my home, and now it is spread to the theater, to the streets, it's something wrong with the law. And it sends the wrong message to the overall society. It's okay for me to be the aggressor because I know I can say, well, stand your ground. I felt threatened. That is unacceptable.
And I'm glad you mentioned theater, because you have the incident now with the man killing someone in a theater in Florida who, because they got an argument, he threw popcorn at him. And this is a white gentleman against a white gentleman. He's citing stand your ground, an ex-law enforcement officer, Jonathan. And then you get the turnaround here is now the shooter is calling himself the victim. The man who killed both Trayvon Martin and Jordan Davis have called themselves the victim. Listen to George Zimmerman and then to Michael Dunn.
Thoughts about the victim, Trayvon Martin. The victim was Trayvon Martin, you know that?
No, I certainly was a victim when I was having my head bashed into the concrete and my nose broken and beaten, so I wouldn't say I was not a victim.
I was thinking about that today. It's like, I'm the victim here. I was the one who was victimized. I mean, I don't know how I'm supposed to put it. It's like they attacked me. I'm the victim.
Right.
I'm the victor, but I was the victim too.
It's something outrageous and at the same time something that is frightening when you hear people, two men, the criminal justice system decides they're guilty or innocent with a jury, but two men, Jonathan, that killed unarmed teenagers who even after that have no sense of remorse. They don't even say, well, I felt frightened, now I see I was wrong, or now I felt my judgment was off. They're still, I'm the victim. They're still like they had the right to do this.
Right. The lack of remorse is stunning. Look, to their minds, Sure, they were the victims. They were completely justified to do what they did.
Even after they find out there was no gun?
Exactly. They feel justified in what they did. And unfortunately, the law allows them to feel this way. And the Congresswoman brought up a very good point in her first answer to you. Stand your ground was in the jury instructions for George Zimmerman's jury, for Michael Dunn's jury. It's not there in big neon letters saying this is the stand your ground provision. It's in how the jury is instructed to look at the evidence. And it is imperative for both George Zimmerman and for Michael Dunn to continue to portray themselves as victims in this case, because in order for you to invoke stand your ground, or for the castle doctrine to be completely obliterated, and to allow you to shoot somebody because you, quote, reasonably have fear for your life or someone else's life, you have to be the victim in order for that to work. And that's the travesty of the stand your ground statute.
Congresswoman, 2 years later, we continue to fight about this law, and we will continue to fight this law. And I think that Trayvon Martin's name will go down in history as maybe one that helped to change and in many ways make better some of the laws.
Reverend, failure is not an option for us. We're going to get it done.
All right. Congresswoman Corrine Brown and Jonathan Capehart, thank you for your time tonight. Tonight's lead, the fight against Stand Your Ground and the legacy of Trayvon Martin. Today, vigils and protests are being held all across the country to mark a somber date. It's been exactly 2 years since the shooting death of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin. The tragedy that sparked a national outcry started as a local news story. Know Trayvon's grieving parents, Tracy Martin and Sabrina Fulton. And within days, the death of this young man triggered massive protests across Florida and beyond. I myself was moved to action. We came for permanent justice. Arrest Zimmerman now. That's what this rally is about.
I want to say first and foremost, I thank God for being here, and I thank God for you being here. I still say we need an arrest. Thank you.
Less than a month after the shooting, President Obama addressed the tragedy.
But my main message is to the parents of Trayvon Martin. If I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon. And, I think they are right to expect that all of us as Americans are going to take this with the seriousness it deserves, and that we're going to get to the bottom of exactly what happened.
3 weeks later, George Zimmerman was finally arrested, and his acquittal last year set off new questions about.
New tonight, a deadly shooting in Sanford. Police have the gun, they've got the shooter, but they have not arrested him. And as Fox 35's Keith Landry tells us, the dead man's grieving family wants to know why not.
Was that a friend of yours? That was my son. It was your son?
This afternoon, we met Tracy Martin at the crime scene. He says his 17-year-old son, Trayvon Martin, was shot to death.
He walked out the house to go to the store. He was going to the store.
The country came to